what was it like? What was a shift like as a miner? I mean, you'd walk to work.
Huh?
Tell me what a typical shift as a miner was.
It depends on what you're doing. If you were a miner working, breaking rock, you go into your working place, and the first thing you do is wet down. Stay where it's safe and wet it all down so that you don't eat the dust, see?
What would you wet it down with?
Water hose. You got water.
You'd have a hose, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
You get it all wet down. Then you take a bar, see, and you got a loose ground, you blast it down here. You take a bar, you got a scaling bar, long bar, and you start barring it down. You bar all the loose stuff down. Make it just as safe as you can make it, see. If you have to put in a stall, put in a stall. And you clean it up, you clean your floors with a shovel. You got it all barred down, see. Well, as soon as you get it all barred down, you're going to timber. That's if you're in a timber store, see. If you're using timber, well, then you stand your timber, see. And as soon as you get your timber stand, you start drilling, make room for more, see. If it's an open stope or you're using rock bolts instead of timber, and you rock bolt everything that's loose, see.
Okay. So you called it making room for more timbers?
Yeah. You make another blast. See, you got to break rock. That's what you're there for. But if you don't have, I ever worked a lot of places later years, they didn't have timber, see. They used rock bolts. Where years ago it was all timber.
Well, you mean, could you lift one of those timbers? Could you lift a timber by yourself?
Yeah, I lifted that stuff. Heavy timber.
So how would you do it? You'd put the two posts up first?
You take a post, and you got a tenet, you see, where you stand them in a tenet, you know that. Stand it in a tenet, and you lace it, what you call. You take a lag and put it across this way, see, and spike them on. You're holding it in place then, see. You get them on, then you do the same with the other ones, see. Then you can put lagging across floor, see. And when you go to timber, you can put your cap up there, then put it up the rest of the way in the girths. See, you're not lifting it from the floor to that's a post is 7.5 high, long. So you're up there where you can lift it. Some of that stuff's pretty heavy. It depends if you're using timber that you use in a drift, sill timber. Some of it's big around. You see that in the drifts. You've seen some of that timber that's in the drifts. Big. Stope timber, smaller. Yeah, I could lift pretty good. I could hold my own.
Well, did you do the drilling too?
I drilled a lot. I used to like to drill.
So what kind of a drill would you use, or what different kinds of drills?
Yeah, the jacklegs, buzzies, and liners. I could, I was 155 was about my weight when I was in good shape. I could handle that stuff. A lot of people can't lift. They're not, I don't know, or can't lift much, I don't know. They have something wrong with their muscles or something. I was used to rough living, you know what I mean? We were kids, you know how they played around here. You never had nothing. And you did a lot of work, and you're running around. Geez, you never owned no cars, when you were young then. Till you got maybe 17, 18. My father never owned a car in his life.
Well, when you were working on a shift, how many times would you blast on a shift?
Blast?
On one shift, how many times would you blast?
Most times. One is all you could make. All depends. There was different occasions. But it blasted quitting time. Then they worked it in later years where you blasted sometimes at noon if you could. If you could blast at noon, contract, Well, then you smoked everybody up yourself, dust was a bad thing, but they kept the practice going all the time anyway. I blasted at noon, the rotation would come out that way, you did it, see. But it was a bad thing.
Who would ever check?
Huh?
Well, who would check if you blasted? Who
Well,
cared?
you got a boss. And if you sent the motor in to get some rock, you better have rock
How would you load that motor?
out of chutes. You've seen them, haven't you, down the mine, chutes?
Okay. Why don't you describe that for me?
Yeah, they had ton cars, and then they had, when they got them 5-ton, easy. Used to be when I first started on the motors, the ton car, and all types of track, good track, bad track, no track. You had quite a lot of experiences, and you got to be pretty careful how you got to know how to run them, because you had to lift them on when they were off. You lifted them cars. Your back could be raw. I lifted hundreds of them.
I mean, you'd have to put your back into it from the.
Yeah, loaded.
Yeah.
Here, have you take two? I have put some on the track where it wasn't not much of a lift. To lift the front end and the back and get my back to it. It all depends, but it was a lift for 2 men. And lift to get a job with bad track with them car, lift them pretty tough on you.
Well, was the track always the same width, or was it different?
Well,
say,
yeah, it was a gauge. You gauged the track, but they'd get spread, Copper water would eat the bottoms out of the rails.
Yeah.
They'd spread. Yeah, in a copper mine, quite a bit of work to keep the track in shape.
Well, now the track between the Steward and the Anselmo was 2 different gauges, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2 inches different.
Which was the Anselmo wider?
20 inches, yeah.
So you couldn't go from one to the other?
Well, they used to steal. They made it go, I worked in the 32 to Steward there, and that boss, there was still a couple of workings, a couple of stopes left, and on the 32 of the Anselmo, see. You went right by the original shaft. Mm-hmm. You went to the original and then to the Anselmo, see. And anyway, that guy, there was a stope in there on the 32 of the Steward in past the original, see. This boss that I was working for that had the 32 of the Steward, he gets short of rock, see. And the 20-inch track was in the original side, see. Well, like night shift, if that stope in the Steward had, or that stope in the Anselmo had blasted, he was short of rock and knew he'd went in. Well, where them 2 tracks came together, here's the Steward, 2 inches shorter, or narrower,
Yeah.
than the Anselmo. You know what that guy would do?
What?
He always had rails around that you could fix. He'd fix 2 or 3 rails. He'd put about me. It was only about not far in there, see, just 50 feet, see. He would take a couple of rails, or say 4 rails. He would go in there. He'd do the dirty work himself, see. He'd go in there. Well, here's a 20-inch track. Here's an 18. He would take that rail and put the ball of the rail sideways, lay it on its side, put it in the flange of the 20-inch rail. He's got an 18-inch track.
And they go get
4 rail, and he'd pull that rock out there, maybe get a railroad car, half a railroad car, whatever he got, take the rails out. Just a spike is all he had holding them in.
Yeah.
See, the rail is sideways like that.
Yeah.
So they call it a slide rail, like a mucking machine.
Uh-huh.
He'd empty that chute. He's gone, no evidence at all. That's if the conditions worked out.
Sure. Well, where was the hot